Elijah walked confidently through the airport terminal, dressed in a sharp navy blazer and slacks. No logos, no jewelry, just quiet elegance. As he approached the first-class boarding line, he felt eyes subtly shift toward him. Some curious, some dismissive. He was used to that. At the gate, a blonde flight attendant with a rigid smile stepped in front of him. "Sir, this line is for first class only," she said, scanning his outfit like it didn't belong. Without a word, Elijah calmly held out his boarding pass. She didn't even bother scanning it. "I think you're in the wrong place. Economy's over there," she added with a half smirk, pointing behind him. There was a brief silence. People around glanced over. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone muttered something about dress codes. Elijah said nothing. He simply nodded and turned away, heading toward the economy line. His expression unreadable. As he walked, he glanced at his phone. A tight schedule. His quarterly board meeting was just hours away. He'd barely make it, but he wouldn't cause a scene. He never did. Inside the plane, Elijah found his assigned seat, in coach. Not because he couldn't afford first class, but because he wanted to see what people did when they thought he didn't belong. He opened his laptop and began typing quietly. A few rows behind him, a young black intern, Malik, blinked in surprise. He nudged his colleague and whispered, "Isn't that the CEO of Novalink?" The other intern looked confused. "No way, he's in economy?" Malik nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's definitely him." Meanwhile, up front, Rachel, the flight attendant, rolled her eyes and leaned toward her coworker. "He really thought he belonged in first class," she whispered loudly enough for a nearby passenger to hear. "People think money buys class. Doesn't mean you fit." Her tone was laced with casual superiority. She chuckled and poured wine for a man in a suit who looked amused. She had no idea what Elijah was typing just rows behind her. Elijah's screen showed a draft email, addressed to his executive assistant, subject line, "In-flight conduct review, immediate." He added names, flight number, time, crew description. Then he hit save. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain who he was. He just documented everything. The faces, the behavior, the reactions. Because Elijah Gaines didn't believe in shouting. He believed in systems, and what happened when you shook one from the inside. Elijah's silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline, something he'd cultivated since childhood. Born in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Detroit, Elijah was raised by his mother, Yvonne, who worked nights cleaning downtown office buildings. She'd come home exhausted, hands raw from bleach, but still found the strength to pack Elijah's school lunch and make sure he studied before bed. They couldn't afford much, but she gave him structure, purpose, and the belief that his mind could carry him further than money ever could. His earliest memory of airports was standing on the cracked sidewalk outside the auto repair shop where he worked weekends, watching planes cut through the sky like silver dreams. Back then, flying wasn't something people like him did. It was something you witnessed, like a fantasy passing overhead. At 16, he won a local coding competition. At 17, he built a scheduling app for a school district. And by the time he turned 22, Elijah had earned a scholarship to MIT, where he lived off instant noodles, worked part-time at a hardware store, and coded all night in the library. It wasn't glamour, it was grit. After graduating, he launched a logistics platform out of his tiny apartment, naming it Novalink. The first 2 years were brutal. Investors didn't believe in him. Clients took meetings, then ghosted him after seeing his skin color. Banks questioned him about fraud when he tried to open business accounts, but Elijah didn't rage. He didn't post threads or rant on stages. He just kept building, and Novalink grew. By its 8th year, it was powering over 400 corporate supply chains across 3 continents. His tech quietly revolutionized back-end delivery systems, and soon major airlines started using Novalink's booking integration modules. He became a quiet king in a digital empire. Yet Elijah's appearance never changed. He still wore neutral suits, still took coach sometimes, still walked with the quiet humility of someone who had been overlooked too many times to care for external validation. That's why the flight attendant's smirk didn't shake him, because he'd heard worse from boardrooms, because he'd been underestimated before, and had learned to make people regret it without ever raising his voice. But this flight wasn't random. 2 months earlier, his HR team at Novalink flagged repeated complaints from their traveling staff, particularly black employees, about how they were treated by airline crews, especially during domestic U.S. flights. Some were called sir or ma'am sarcastically. Others were asked multiple times for ID. A few were denied upgrades they had paid for. Elijah read every report, not because he was outraged, but because he was curious. He believed in systems, and something in this one was failing. So he chose a route he often took, one with a partner airline using his own company's tech infrastructure. He booked a first-class ticket under his own name, and he dressed like he always did, modestly. He wanted to see what would happen when a system met the person behind it. Rachel had no idea that the man she had just pushed to economy was not only the CEO of a major tech company, but also the reason her airline's booking process didn't crash every Monday morning. She didn't know that her terminal ran on a system Elijah helped write. She didn't know he had access to every digital breadcrumb of that flight. Timestamps, crew logs, seat assignments, flight manifests, and most importantly, she didn't know this wasn't just a personal trip. It was a live assessment. While she poured drinks and giggled with passengers, Elijah was quietly syncing data to a private log system on his laptop. He had enabled a passive audio stream to record interactions within 3 rows. It wasn't illegal. It was part of the beta field test for user response tracking his company was piloting. Rachel's words were now part of that record. Elijah wasn't collecting revenge. He was collecting evidence. Because sometimes power doesn't look like shouting back. It looks like typing a quiet line of code or forwarding a file to the right inbox. And this time, Rachel had given him exactly what he came for. The flight was calm on the surface, but tension floated in the air like static before a storm. Rachel, still smug from her earlier correction, strutted confidently through the aisles of the aircraft. Each time she passed Elijah's row, her eyes lingered just long enough to remind him, "You don't belong here." She stopped by a white-haired man in a tailored suit, seat 3A, pouring him a second flute of champagne with an exaggerated smile. "For our valued frequent flyer," she said, leaning just enough to brush his shoulder. He chuckled and flirted back. Elijah didn't flinch. He glanced at the man, then returned to his laptop. A new email had arrived from his chief financial officer, asking for his thoughts on a recent merger offer. Elijah typed out a few strategic notes, CC'd his legal counsel, and added a quiet note at the bottom. Attached, preliminary documentation on the airline incident. Confirm legal protocols. He wasn't rushing. He was documenting. On the tray table beside him was a slim leather folder. Inside, his report was almost complete, titled Field Discrimination Experience, Tier 1 Airline Review. It outlined time-stamped entries: when he boarded, the gate interaction, seat relocation, witness behavior, verbal comments, crew conduct, and supporting media. It wasn't emotional. It was structured, clean, professional, devastating. Elijah added one final line. Behavior remained consistent during in-flight engagement. Targeted tone intact throughout. The plane jolted slightly as turbulence warning lights flickered on overhead. Rachel moved through the cabin again with a practiced frown. When she reached Elijah's row, her tone dropped to cold formality. "Please follow all instructions. Some passengers need extra help understanding safety rules." Her voice had a rehearsed sharpness, like a teacher chastising a child. A few nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. One woman, seated in business class just ahead, narrowed her eyes. Her name was Cynthia, a marketing executive who'd seen far too many moments like this. She discreetly reached for her phone and started recording the exchange. Rachel moved on, unaware. Elijah looked up at Cynthia briefly. She nodded. No words were needed. Back on his screen, Elijah opened another tab. The LinkedIn profile of the airline's CEO, Gregory Palmer. They had met once at a tech conference. Palmer had praised Novalink's seamless integration with the airline's new smart systems. Tomorrow they'd meet again, this time with Elijah delivering the opening keynote at the International Transportation and Tech Leadership Summit in Dallas. The irony wasn't lost on him. He attached his report draft to a secure message, and sent it to his internal executive board. In the recipient list, he added, Gregory Palmer CC'd with a simple note. See you in Dallas. We'll talk data. Cynthia sent her video anonymously to the airline's customer relations social media inbox. She added one sentence. Is this how you train your staff to treat paying passengers? The final hour of the flight passed in silence. Elijah closed his laptop, packed it away, and remained seated, composed and calm. But as the seatbelt signs dimmed and the plane taxied to the gate, he stood up a moment early, like many business travelers in a rush. Rachel appeared again, immediately annoyed. Sir, she said flatly, economy exits last. This time Elijah turned. He faced her with no heat in his eyes, no raised tone, just stillness. Thank you for the reminder, he said, his voice low and direct. You've helped confirm everything I needed today. She blinked. Whatever, she muttered, brushing past him again with dismissive irritation. He waited until the line moved, then exited the plane without another word. At the baggage carousel, the air smelled of conveyor belt rubber and overworked air conditioning. Elijah stood still, phone in hand, eyes scanning through stock updates. Then, a man in a tailored Navy suit stepped forward, holding a clipboard. Mr. Gaines? Yes. I'm James Teller, the airline's Executive Vice President of Operations, would like to speak with you in the VIP lounge. It's urgent. Elijah didn't look surprised. Lead the way. As they walked past the crowd, Elijah caught movement in his peripheral vision. Rachel had just exited from the crew gate. She spotted him walking beside the suited man, heading not toward the exit, but toward the private lounge reserved for elite clients and corporate meetings. Her smile faltered. She stood there, luggage still in hand, watching him disappear behind velvet curtains, the same ones she had once pointedly kept people like him away from. Confusion flickered across her face. She turned to her coworker. Was that someone important? Her voice didn't carry the same confidence this time, because something about the way that man walked, calm, sure, untouchable, made it clear. He wasn't just a passenger, and something was coming. The air inside the VIP lounge was different. Softer lighting, marble counters, and the quiet hush of tension barely concealed behind corporate courtesy. 3 executives stood as Elijah entered. The airline's vice president of operations, a polished woman from PR, and a sharply dressed legal representative all extended hands quickly. Elijah shook none of them. Mr. Gaines, we're deeply sorry, the VP began. If we had known you were on board. Elijah raised his hand. That's exactly the problem. The room fell silent. You only care when someone holds power. You're not apologizing for the conduct. You're apologizing because it might cost you something. He placed his leather folder on the table, opened it, and turned his laptop toward them. This is what I experienced, he said simply. He hit play. The footage rolled. Clear audio of Rachel's tone at the gate, the condescension mid-flight, the snide comment as he exited. Then a second clip played, Cynthia's recording. A third, then a fourth, submitted through his company's anonymous passenger review portal in real time. The faces of the executives stiffened. Words like unacceptable and training oversight floated weakly in the air. This is not about retribution, Elijah said. I'm not suing you, but what I am doing is holding you accountable. He leaned forward. You've built a brand that says luxury meets respect, but you've hired gatekeepers who don't understand either. They humiliate, they profile, they reinforce the very barriers you claim to break. The PR woman cleared her throat. That was Rachel Miller, wasn't it? Elijah didn't respond. He closed the laptop. You'll do what you think is necessary. But understand this. Novalink is reviewing all partnership terms with your airline, and I'll be sharing this experience in a keynote tomorrow morning. They didn't ask which keynote. They already knew. That evening, as Elijah sat in his hotel suite reviewing notes, Rachel was getting a call from HR. She was told to report to headquarters immediately, not for punishment, but for review and investigation. She didn't understand how the man in economy had suddenly become the focal point of every internal email. But something in her gut told her this wasn't just about one passenger. The next morning, at the global summit, Hundreds of industry leaders filled a sleek auditorium in Dallas. Elijah stood behind a glass podium, the Novalink logo glowing behind him. He was calm, measured, just as he had been on the flight. The massive screen behind him lit up with a bold title, "Dignity Should Never Be Doubted." He didn't name the airline. He didn't mention Rachel. He didn't need to. He simply told the story, how he boarded a flight, calmly, silently, and was told he didn't belong. How he was pushed back, insulted with a smile, dismissed without thought. And how, had he not held power, that experience would have gone unchecked, like it does for so many others, every day. He paused. The crowd was still. Some executives lowered their heads. Then he said, "It wasn't the seat I wanted. It was the respect that should have come with it." Applause didn't explode. It rose slowly, like a wave that builds until it's unstoppable. People stood. Some clapped hard. Some just nodded, eyes wet with realization. Online, clips from the speech flooded social media. The title alone went viral. Black CEO shares quiet response to first-class discrimination. News outlets picked it up. Influencers quoted him. Travelers shared their own stories in the comments. The moment became bigger than Elijah. It became a mirror to an industry. That evening, the airline posted a public statement, an apology, acknowledgement of the incident, and a promise to implement new anti-bias training and staff accountability systems. Rachel wasn't fired, but she was suspended indefinitely and required to undergo full-scale corporate equity training. Word spread among crew members quickly. Her name became a cautionary tale. Months passed. One early morning, Elijah walked through another terminal. He was tired, fresh off a contract negotiation, but composed as always. At the gate, a young black flight attendant smiled genuinely. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Gaines." He nodded in greeting and stepped into first class, this time without resistance. As he placed his briefcase beneath the seat, the attendant leaned slightly and said, "Just wanted to say thank you, sir, for what you did." Elijah looked up, surprised. The attendant continued softly, "We all heard about it. A lot changed because of you." Elijah offered a quiet smile. Then he replied, "This seat doesn't define me, but how you treat people always will." He leaned back, closed his eyes as the engines hummed to life, and exhaled, not with triumph, but peace, because he hadn't just changed a policy. He'd reminded them what dignity looked like when it stood quietly and refused to disappear.